Now for a brief intro on the fry scream. Now if you're watching this video at home and you haven't done so yet, make sure you go back and warm up first. Again, as I always say, you don't want to go into any one of these sounds without having prepared yourself for the work you're going to do. So if you're watching this and haven't done it yet, make sure you go warm up and then come back here. Now, this is one of two of the main types of vocal distortion out there when it comes to metal vocals specifically. I already talked a little bit about the false chords. Now we're going to touch on the fry. Now, fry scream is different and interesting because it is entirely vocal cord based. Technically, when you do balance this appropriately, this style is pretty easy on the body. And because it's vocal cord based, it is easy to translate from a screaming, more intense metal sound to a sung note back and forth. However, this is only when balanced appropriately. This is incredibly important when it comes to making this sound in a healthy and safe way. Because more often than not, you'll find that people push a bit too hard to get this sound out. So this is where I see the majority of problems come forth. So as a disclaimer, if you're someone that wants to use the fry vocal technique in metal, feel free to do so. Follow the steps I'm going to give you, but keep in mind that it is easier to hurt yourself because this is entirely vocal cord based. Now, before we get into the actual scream sound itself, it's important to understand what's known as the fry vocal register. Everyone has one. It depends on your own voice, on your own range, specifically your lower range. Brief recap on this and how it works. With sound science, when we make higher pitches, the vocal cords are moving faster and faster. And on the way down, the vocal cords are slowing down and loosening and moving slower and slower. Now, a lot of times when people try and, a lot of people that will try and speak lower on a regular basis will have this kind of clamped down, thinner sound. And that's because they're trying to squeeze and project to get the voice lower. And sometimes this happens, depending on who you are, when you try and sing lower as well. Example. Hear how it got kind of tight? Or this happens. Hear it got breathy? That's because the muscles, these exterior muscles outside of the area of the larynx are all trying to clamp down and get involved in sound production. Now, like I've said, the only things that need to be happening are the vocal cords speeding up or slowing down. So none of that other stuff is necessary for sound creation or for pitch variation. If we can get down to the bottom end of our voice without any sort of muscular interruption, something really interesting starts to happen, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you now. Notice how there's going to be no muscle tension. This is the fry vocal register. When you go down to a certain point, your brain starts to be able to hear the individual little connections of the vocal cords themselves. This requires the vocal cords totally loosening and slackening to get to this point. The vocal cords are still moving relatively fast, which is why, as you'll notice, you can still control the pitch as you would any sort of area of your voice, but it's just slow enough where you can start to pick up on those individual connections, like I said. Now, scaling it back, everyone has a fry vocal register. It's just going to be in a different spot depending on your own voice. If you have a higher pitched voice, your fry vocal register isn't going to happen in the same spot that mine just did. On the other side of the coin, if you have a lower voice than I personally do, this will probably happen a bit further along in your range. And that's totally normal and totally fine. Base it on yourself. As you're experimenting with this on your own, make sure you stretch the body and the muscles of the upper torso and the neck and the throat and the face to make sure that when you're trying this out, not only will you be able to notice if different muscles are getting tight, but you'll be able to deactivate them, to be able to descend into this register of the voice naturally and without any sort of interference. Nothing needs to clamp down or get breathy or tighten or restrict or cinch inward. You should be able to slip into this voice. This is very commonly known as the grudge sound for anyone that's familiar with that franchise. Same thing. Now, the fry vocal register and the fry vocal scream are not the same thing. Not the same thing. This is only one aspect of this and one of the building blocks that we're going to have you doing that's going to make the fry scream later on. Because we're going to add different aspects of sound direction and melodic intensity on top of just overall direction and resonance and projection added to the sound to create what is known as the present day fry scream. And we're going to get there instead of pushing through balancing and easing our way in just as we do everything else.